November 23, 1883, Redemption Town, Texas. The cattle market sprawled across Main Street like a living thing, all dust and noise and the sharp smell of animals pressed too close together. Jesse Mackenzie stood at the edge of it, one hand resting on his daughter's shoulder, the other gripping a list his neighbor had written out in careful script. Flour, salt, coffee, nails, the everyday things that kept a man and his child alive through another Texas winter. He was 36 years old, though the lines around his eyes made him look older. 7 years of raising a daughter alone would do that to a man. Waking before dawn to cook breakfast and braid hair with clumsy fingers, answering questions about a mother Lucy May could barely remember. The girl tugged at his coat sleeve now, her small face tilted up toward his. She was 6 years old, blonde braids coming loose from the morning's hurried work, her mother's gray eyes bright with excitement. This was the biggest day of her year. Thanksgiving week brought traders from 3 counties, and the town transformed into something magical for a child who spent most of her time on a ranch 20 miles from anywhere. "Jesse, we need to get the ribbon for my dress, you promised." He nodded, scanning the crowd. The market was bigger than usual this year. Good cattle prices meant money flowing, and money meant people willing to spend. Cowboys fresh off the trail drives, ranchers comparing stock. Merchants hawking everything from saddles to soup pots. "We'll get your ribbon, Lucy girl. Let me just find old Morrison's stall first. Need those nails before they sell out." She bounced on her toes, patient in the way children are when they know they'll get what they want eventually. Jesse steered her through the press of bodies, keeping her close. A man could lose a child in a crowd like this. He'd seen it happen once years ago before Catherine died. A mother's scream cutting through the noise, the terrible minutes of searching. The child found eventually, crying beside a wagon wheel, but those minutes had aged the mother a decade. He wouldn't let that happen. Not to Lucy, not to the only piece of Catherine he had left. They found Morrison's hardware stall tucked between a feed merchant and a woman selling preserves. Jesse paid for the nails, added a small bag of peppermint sticks when Lucy's eyes went wide at the sight of them. Her delighted squeal made something warm unfold in his chest. He didn't smile often anymore, but he came close. "Now the ribbon," she said, already pulling him toward the dry goods section. That's when she stopped. Her hand went tight on his coat, fingers digging in with sudden urgency. Her whole body had gone still, the excitement draining out of her like water from a cracked bucket. "Lucy? Pa?" Her voice came out small and strange. "Pa, look." He followed her gaze. At the far edge of the market square, where the legitimate stalls gave way to abandoned crates and broken wagons, something huddled in the shadow of a tilted cart. At first Jesse thought it was a pile of rags, the kind of refuse that collected in forgotten corners. Then the pile moved. It was a child, a boy, maybe 8 years old, though hunger had a way of making age hard to guess. He wore trousers that ended 3 inches above his ankles, and a shirt so thin Jesse could see the outline of ribs through the fabric. No coat. No shoes. His feet were pale against the frozen mud, the kind of pale that came before frostbite turned them black. But it was the eyes that hit Jesse hardest. Empty eyes. The kind that had stopped expecting anything good from the world. "Pa," Lucy's voice trembled. "Pa, can we keep him?" The question landed wrong in Jesse's chest. Like a key turning in a lock he'd welded shut 7 years ago. "You don't keep people, Lucy girl. People aren't horses." But his feet were already moving, carrying him across the square before his mind caught up. Lucy followed, still gripping his coat, her small boots struggling to match his longer stride. They stopped 3 feet from the boy. Up close, it was worse. Bruises yellowing along his jaw, cuts on his hands, some fresh, some scarred over. A hollowness that went deeper than hunger, down into the bone and soul. The boy didn't look up, didn't acknowledge their presence. He sat with his arms wrapped around his knees, trying to hold in what little warmth his body still had. "Hey there, son." Nothing. Not even a flicker. Lucy knelt in the mud beside Jessie, heedless of her good dress. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out one of the peppermint sticks, still wrapped in wax paper. "Are you hungry?" The boy's eyes moved then. Just barely. They fixed on the candy with the kind of focus that comes from knowing hunger as a constant companion. But he didn't reach for it, like he didn't believe it was real, or didn't believe he deserved it. "Go on," Jessie said, his voice rougher than he intended. "Take it." Slowly, so slowly, the boy's hand crept forward. His fingers were raw, nails broken and dirty, and when he took the peppermint stick, he clutched it so tight Jessie thought it might shatter. Then he unwrapped it with shaking hands and put it in his mouth. Not eating it, just holding it there, like he was afraid someone would take it back. "When did you last eat?" Jessie asked. The boy's throat worked. He pulled the candy from his mouth, and his voice came out like sandpaper on wood. "Don't remember, sir." Lucy's hand went to the boy's shoulder. She was crying now, tears cutting clean tracks through the dust on her cheeks. "Pa, we have to help him." Jessie's jaw tightened. He'd come to this town for nails and ribbon. He'd come to give his daughter one good day before winter locked them away on the ranch for months. He hadn't come to get involved in someone else's trouble. But he was looking at this boy, at the emptiness in those eyes, and he was seeing something else. Another child, another time. His brother Thomas, 10 years old, burning up with fever in a farmhouse outside San Antonio. Jessie had been 15, helpless, watching his brother die because their father was too proud to ride for a doctor. "I couldn't save you, Tommy, but maybe I can save this one." "Where's your people?" Jessie tried again. The boy flinched. Actual physical recoil, like Jessie had raised a hand to strike him. "Don't have people. Everyone's got someone." "Mother? Father?" "Dead. Both of them." The boy's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Been on my own since I was 5, 3 years. 3 years this child had been surviving alone." The knowledge sat heavy in Jessie's gut. "You got a name?" The silence stretched so long Jessie thought the question would go unanswered. Then, barely audible, "Emmett. Emmett Cole. I'm Jessie Mackenzie. This is my daughter, Lucy May." Lucy wiped her eyes and tried to smile. "Hi, Emmett." The boy stared at her like he'd never seen kindness before and didn't know what to do with it. "You hungry for more than candy?" Jessie asked, the smallest nod. "All right then. Come on." Jessie stood and held out his hand. Emmett just stared at it, calculating, weighing survival against whatever hell he was running from. Then, with the hesitation of someone who'd been betrayed before, he placed his small, freezing hand in Jessie's calloused palm. The contact sent a jolt through Jessie. The fragility of those thin fingers, the ice-cold skin, the way the boy's hand trembled, not just from cold, but from fear. He pulled Emmett to his feet gently. The child swayed, his legs barely holding him. "Can you walk?" "Yes, sir." They made slow progress through the market. Jessie kept his pace measured so Emmett could keep up. People glanced at them, a rancher and his well-dressed daughter leading a half-frozen street child. But no one stopped them. That was frontier courtesy. Mind your business. Let others mind theirs. Jessie led them to Morrison's General Store, where Hank Morrison ran a rough establishment that sold everything from rifle ammunition to penny candy. Hank was leaning against the counter, working a splinter from his thumb, when they walked in. "Jessie Mackenzie." Hank straightened, surprised. "Didn't expect to see you buying twice in one day. Need hot food. You got stew?" Hank's eyes tracked to Emmett, taking in the ragged clothes, the bare feet, the hollow cheeks. His expression shifted, something like pity crossing his weathered face. "Got beef stew on the stove and back." "How many bowls?" "3. And coffee." Hank nodded and disappeared through the rear door. Jessie guided Emmett and Lucy to the small table in the corner, the one Hank kept for customers who wanted to eat on the premises. "Sit," he told them both. Emmett lowered himself into the chair like he expected it to collapse. His eyes darted around the store, tracking exits, measuring distances. always looking for escape routes. Lucy sat beside him, close but not touching. She'd pulled out her handkerchief, and now she was worrying the edge of it between her fingers. "Are you cold, Emmett? We could get you a blanket." "I'm fine, miss. You can call me Lucy." She smiled at him. "We're friends now." The boy's face did something complicated, like he wanted to believe her but didn't dare. Hank returned with 3 bowls of stew and a pot of coffee that smelled like salvation. Jesse paid in silver coin, then set a bowl in front of Emmett. "Eat slow, you'll make yourself sick otherwise." Emmett stared at the stew like it might vanish if he blinked. Then he picked up the spoon with shaking hands and took a careful bite. His eyes closed. For just a moment the fear left his face, replaced by something that looked almost like relief. Lucy ate her stew with neat, small bites, watching Emmett the whole time. Jesse poured coffee for himself and milk for the children, letting the warmth seep into his hands while he observed. Emmett was methodical, controlled, each spoonful deliberate, like he was rationing even abundance. That kind of discipline came from living hungry, from never knowing when the next meal might come. Jesse waited until the boy had eaten half the bowl before speaking again. "Emmett, I need you to tell me the truth. Are you in trouble?" The spoon clattered against the bowl. Emmett's hands clenched into fists, and his breathing quickened. Short, panicked gasps. "Easy." Jesse kept his voice level. "Easy, son. I'm not turning you over to anybody. Just need to know what we're dealing with." Emmett's eyes flicked up, searching Jesse's face for the lie. The trap. The betrayal he'd learned to expect. "I promise," Jesse added, and he meant it with a certainty that unsettled him. The boy's breathing slowed, but his hands stayed fisted. "There's men. They'll be looking for me." "What kind of men?" "The kind that buy kids, or take them, make them work." Jesse's blood went cold. "Work doing what?" "Railroad gang, building track west of here. 20, maybe 25 of us. Kids nobody wants, orphans, runaways. They said they'd give us food and beds, but it wasn't like that. It wasn't like that at all." Emmett's voice had gone flat. Empty. The voice of someone who'd learned that feeling too much would break you. "What did they do to you?" "We worked. Dawn to dark. Hauling rail ties, driving spikes. If you were too slow, they didn't feed you. If you complained, they beat you. And if you tried to run—" He trailed off, but his hand moved unconsciously to his ribs, where Jesse could see the outline of old bruises through the thin shirt. Lucy made a small, hurt sound. Her hand reached across the table and covered Emmett's fist. "You're safe now." Jesse wished he could promise that. But he'd lived on the frontier long enough to know that safe was a luxury, and promises were easy to break. "How long were you with them?" 3 years, since I was 5. 3 years. This child had spent 3 years in hell, and Jesse hadn't known. Nobody had known, or if they'd known, they hadn't cared. "How many kids are still there?" Emmett's eyes filled with tears, but he blinked them back. "Last I counted, 23, but some die. New ones come." Jesse's hands tightened around his coffee cup until his knuckles went white. "Who runs this gang?" "Man named Silas Crane. Got 2 others with him, Boone and Clay. They're mean, but Crane's worse. He likes hurting us. Says it builds character." The rage that surged through Jesse was white-hot and immediate. He forced it down, kept his voice steady. "How'd you get away?" "Waited till they were drunk. Cut the rope with broken glass. Ran for 3 days. Hid in hay wagons when I could. Walked when I couldn't. 3 days. This child had survived 3 days alone, running from men who would kill him if they caught him. And you ended up here." Emmett nodded. Thought redemption was far enough. Thought maybe I could hide. "But if they find me," he stopped, his voice cracking. "If they find me, they'll kill me." Crane said so. Said if anyone ran, he'd make an example. Lucy's hand tightened on Emmett's fist. "We won't let them find you." Jesse looked at his daughter. 6 years old and already braver than most men he knew. She had her mother's heart. Catherine would have done exactly this. Would have brought this boy home without a second thought. The memory of his wife hit him like a fist to the chest. 7 years gone, and sometimes the grief still felt fresh as a new wound. But Catherine wasn't here. Jesse was. And he had to decide what kind of man he wanted to be. He looked at Emmett, really looked at him. At the fear and hope warring in those two old eyes. At the way the boy held himself, ready to run at the first sign of danger. At the small hand Lucy had wrapped around his fist, anchoring him to this moment, to this unlikely kindness. "Finish your stew," Jesse said, "then we're going home." Emmett's eyes went wide. "Home? My ranch, 20 miles north of here. You can stay there. Get warm. Get fed. Figure things out. You don't have to. I can manage on my own. I always have." Jesse leaned forward. "Son, you're 8 years old. You shouldn't have to manage on your own, and you don't have to, not anymore. But what if they come looking? Then they'll have to go through me." The words hung in the air between them. A promise, a declaration, a line drawn in the sand. Emmett stared at Jesse, and slowly, so slowly, something shifted in his expression. The emptiness didn't disappear, but underneath it, something else flickered to life. Something small and fragile that looked almost like hope. "Okay," he whispered. Lucy bounced in her seat, clapping her hands. "You're going to love the ranch, Emmett. We have horses and chickens and a creek where you can catch frogs in the summer. And Pa makes the best flapjacks. And I can teach you to read if you don't know how. And we can be like brother and sister. Do you want to be my brother?" Emmett looked at her like she was speaking a foreign language. Like the concept of family was something he'd forgotten how to understand. "I don't know how to be a brother." Lucy's smile was pure sunshine. "That's okay. I'll teach you." They finished their meal in a different kind of silence. Not uncomfortable, but tentative. Like all three of them were feeling their way through unfamiliar territory. When the bowls were empty, Jesse paid Hank Morrison and led the children back out into the cold afternoon. The market was starting to thin as people headed home before dark. Jesse needed to collect his wagon, load the supplies, get back to the ranch before full night fell. But first, he had to get Emmett something warmer to wear. He found a stall selling second-hand clothes and bought a wool coat that was too big but would keep the boy warm. A pair of boots that were scuffed but solid. Thick socks, a hat with ear flaps. Emmett took each item like it was made of gold. When Jesse helped him into the coat and buttoned it up, the boy's eyes filled with tears. "No one's ever—" He stopped, unable to finish. Jesse's throat tightened. "Well, someone is now." They loaded the wagon in silence. Jesse lifted Lucy into the seat first, then reached up to help Emmett climb aboard. The boy hesitated, then took it and climbed up. Jesse settled him between Lucy and himself, making sure the coat was buttoned tight. The ride back to the ranch would take 2 hours. The sun was already sinking toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Jesse clicked his tongue, and the horses started forward. Redemption Town fell away behind them, and the prairie opened up ahead. Wide and empty and beautiful in the fading light. Lucy chattered about the market, about the ribbon she'd finally gotten, about the dress she'd wear to Thanksgiving dinner. Emmett listened without responding, but Jesse saw the way the boy leaned slightly toward Lucy, like he was drawn to her brightness, the way moths were drawn to flame. The first stars were appearing when they crested the final rise, and the ranch came into view. It wasn't much. A cabin built from logs Jesse had cut himself, a barn for the horses, a chicken coop, corrals for the cattle. But it was solid. It was home. Jesse pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down. He helped Lucy first, then turned to Emmett. The boy sat frozen in the seat, staring at the cabin like he couldn't believe it was real. "Come on," Jesse said gently. "Let's get you inside." Emmett climbed down slowly. His legs were shaking. Whether from cold or emotion, Jesse couldn't tell. Lucy grabbed Emmett's hand and pulled him toward the cabin. "Wait till you see inside. Pa built the whole thing himself, and we have a real stove, not just a fireplace. And there's a loft where you can sleep. It's warm up there." She pushed open the door and dragged Emmett inside. Jesse followed, carrying the supplies. The cabin was cold. The fire had died to embers while they were gone, but it was shelter, and after the brutal day, that was enough. Jesse moved with practiced efficiency, building up the fire, filling the kettle, pulling out blankets. Lucy helped without being asked, her small hands quick and capable. Emmett stood in the middle of the room, turning slowly, taking it all in. The rough-hewn furniture, the shelves lined with books, the bearskin rug, the rifle mounted above the door. "You can sleep up there." Jesse pointed to the loft ladder. "It's warm, and there's extra blankets. Lucy will show you. I can sleep on the floor." Emmett's voice was quick, anxious. "Don't want to be trouble. You're not trouble. And the floor's too cold. Go on." Lucy took Emmett's hand again and led him to the ladder. She climbed up first, nimble as a squirrel, and Emmett followed more slowly. Jesse heard Lucy's voice drifting down, showing Emmett where to sleep, how to arrange the blankets, chattering on about everything and nothing. Jesse stood alone in the firelight, listening, his daughter's kindness, this boy's quiet wonder, the sound of life returning to a cabin that had been too quiet for too long. He thought about Catherine, about what she would say if she could see this. She'd probably laugh, tell him he was a fool for taking in strays. Then she'd roll up her sleeves and start cooking, because that's what Catherine did. She fed people. She loved people, even when they didn't deserve it, especially when they didn't deserve it. Jesse poured himself coffee and stood at the window, looking out at the darkening prairie. Somewhere out there, men were looking for Emmett, men who thought they owned him, men who would come here if they knew where to look. Let them come. The thought surprised him with its fierceness. He'd spent 7 years avoiding trouble, avoiding connection, avoiding anything that might crack open the carefully constructed walls around his heart. But this boy had walked through those walls like they were made of paper. Or maybe it was Lucy who'd done it, with one simple question. "Can we keep him, Pa?" Jesse didn't know yet if keeping Emmett was the right choice. Didn't know if he had the strength to protect this child from the monsters hunting him. Didn't know if his heart could survive caring about someone again, only to lose them. But he knew he couldn't walk away. Couldn't leave Emmett to freeze in that market square. Couldn't send him back to the hell he'd escaped. So he'd made a choice. Maybe a foolish one, maybe a dangerous one. But it was his choice. He heard footsteps on the ladder, turned to see Emmett climbing down, moving quiet as always. "Can't sleep?" The boy shook his head. "Too many thoughts." Jesse nodded. "I know that feeling." Emmett came to stand beside him at the window. They stood in silence for a while, looking out at the night. "Mr. Mackenzie?" "Jesse." "Jesse." Emmett's voice was barely a whisper. "Why are you helping me?" Jesse considered the question. He could give the easy answer. "Because it's the right thing to do. Because you need help. Because my daughter asked." But this boy deserved more than easy answers. "I had a brother once," Jesse said slowly. "Thomas. He died when he was 10. Fever took him. I was 15 and I couldn't save him. Couldn't do a damn thing except watch him slip away." He paused. "I've spent 20 years wishing I could go back, wishing I could have done something different, but I can't. Tommy's gone, but you're here. And maybe I can't save everyone. Maybe I can't fix everything that's broken in this world, but I can give you a warm place to sleep and food to eat, and that's a start." Emmett looked up at him, and in the firelight his eyes were wet. "No one's ever helped before." Jesse's throat tightened. "Well, someone's helping now." They stood together in the silence. Outside, wind howled through the prairie grass. Inside, the fire crackled, and Lucy's soft breathing drifted down from the loft. Emmett's hand crept into Jesse's, small and cold and trusting. Jesse looked down at their joined hands, at this fragile connection, this unlikely family taking shape in the ruins of grief and loss. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, didn't know if Silas Crane would come, didn't know if he was strong enough to protect this boy. But he knew one thing, he was going to try. The next morning dawned cold and clear. Jesse woke before sunrise, as he always did, and started the fire. He made coffee and started breakfast, moving quietly so as not to wake the children. But when he looked up, Emmett was descending the ladder. The boy wore the clothes Jesse had bought him, and though they were still too big, he looked better. Color in his cheeks, light in his eyes. "Morning," Jesse said. "Morning, sir. Told you last night." "It's Jesse." "Yes, sir. Jesse." The name came out uncertain, like Emmett wasn't sure he had permission to use it. "You sleep all right?" "Better than I have in 3 years." Jesse nodded and went back to the stove. He was frying bacon when Lucy came down, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Is Emmett still here?" "I thought maybe I dreamed him." "I'm here," Emmett said quietly. Lucy's face lit up. "Good. Because I want to show you the horses after breakfast, and the chickens, and maybe we can go down to the creek if it's not too cold." They ate breakfast together. Bacon and eggs and biscuits with honey. Emmett ate slowly, savoring each bite. Lucy chattered about everything and nothing. Jesse listened and poured coffee and felt something in his chest loosen. This is what family was supposed to feel like. After breakfast, Lucy dragged Emmett outside to show him the ranch. Jesse watched from the window as she introduced him to the horses, her hands flying as she explained each animal's name and personality. Emmett listened with quiet attention, reaching out carefully to touch a mare's nose when Lucy encouraged him. The boy was good with animals, gentle, patient. Jesse was washing dishes when he heard it. Hoofbeats. 3 horses coming fast from the south. His blood went cold. He dried his hands and moved to the rifle above the door, pulled it down, checked the load. Then he stepped outside. 3 riders were coming up the road. They rode hard, kicking up dust, and even from a distance, Jesse could see they weren't here for a friendly visit. Lucy and Emmett were at the corral. Jesse called to them, keeping his voice level. "Lucy, Emmett, get inside, now." Lucy's smile faded. She looked toward the riders, then back at her father. "Pa? Inside, both of you. Don't come out till I say." Emmett had gone pale. He grabbed Lucy's hand and pulled her toward the cabin. They disappeared inside, and Jesse heard the door close. He stood in his yard, rifle held loose but ready, and waited. The riders slowed as they approached. They fanned out, forming a line 20 feet from where Jesse stood. The man in the middle was tall and broad-shouldered, maybe 45, with a scar running down his left cheek. He wore a black coat and a flat-brimmed hat, and his eyes were the color of stone. The 2 flanking him were younger, one tall and thin, the other short and heavy. Both wore gun belts. "Morning," the scarred man said. His voice was smooth, too smooth. "Name's Silas Crane." Jesse said nothing. Crane's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm looking for a boy, about 8 years old, dark hair, skinny. He ran off from my camp 3 days back." "This is private property," Jesse said, "and I haven't seen any runaways. That so?" Crane's gaze drifted past Jesse toward the cabin. "Sounds like you got kids here, though." "I can hear them. Just my daughter." "Mind if we take a look?" "Won't take but a minute." "I do mind. And I'm asking you to leave." The smile vanished from Crane's face. "Now hold on. That boy is my legal ward. I got papers from Judge Whitmore in Austin. I took him in when nobody else would. Gave him food and shelter. And he repaid me by stealing supplies and running off. That makes him a thief." Jesse's grip tightened on the rifle. "You got no rights on my land, and I'm done being polite. Turn around. Ride out. Don't come back." The thin man, Boone, spat into the dirt. "Big talk for one man alone." "I'm not alone," Jesse said quietly. "I got 30 rounds in this Spencer, and I don't miss. You want to test that? Go ahead." Crane studied him, calculating, weighing whether this rancher would actually pull the trigger. Jesse let him see the answer in his eyes. "Yes, I will." Crane's jaw tightened. He raised a hand, and his men settled back in their saddles. "This isn't over, Mackenzie. That boy's mine by law. I'll be back with the sheriff, with papers. And when I am, you'll hand him over or you'll go to jail for harboring a fugitive." Jesse's voice was ice. Get off my land." For a long moment nobody moved. Then Crane jerked his reins, turning his horse. "We'll be back." They rode off at a canter, dust rising in their wake. Jesse stood watching until they disappeared over the rise. Even then, he waited another 5 minutes, making sure they weren't circling back. Finally, he lowered the rifle and turned toward the cabin. Lucy and Emmett stood in the doorway. Lucy's face was pale. Emmett looked like he might be sick. Jesse walked over to them, still carrying the rifle. "It's all right, they're gone." Emmett's voice came out broken. "That was him. That was Crane. I know. He'll come back. He always comes back. And next time he'll have the law. He'll have papers. You'll have to give me up." Jesse knelt down so he was eye level with the boy. "Listen to me, Emmett. I don't care what papers he's got. I don't care if he brings the whole damn army. You're staying here, long as you want to. Understand? But the law. Sometimes the law's wrong. And sometimes a man has to do what's right even when it's not legal." Emmett's eyes filled with tears. "Why? Why would you do this? You don't even know me." Jesse thought about his answer, about Thomas, about Catherine, about 7 years of loneliness and grief. About the moment Lucy asked if they could keep this boy, and something inside Jesse had cracked open. "Because my daughter asked me to," he said simply, "and because it's the right thing to do, and because—" He paused. "Because you remind me that there's still good worth fighting for in this world." A tear slid down Emmett's cheek. Lucy wrapped her arms around him from the side. "You're my brother now," she said fiercely, "and nobody takes my brother." Jesse stood and looked out at the prairie, at the dust still settling where Crane and his men had ridden. He'd made his choice, drawn his line, and now he'd have to live with the consequences. But as he looked at these two children, at the hope and fear and trust in their eyes, he knew he'd make the same choice again. Some things were worth fighting for. Some battles had to be fought, even when you knew the cost. And this boy, this lost, broken, brave child, was worth every risk. Jesse put his hand on Emmett's shoulder. "Come on, let's get back inside. We've got plans to make." The threat hung over the ranch like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Jesse knew Crane would return. Men like that always did. They didn't forgive defiance, and they didn't forget debts they believed were owed. That first night after the confrontation, Jesse sat at the kitchen table long after the children had gone to sleep. The lamp burned low, casting shadows that danced across the rough-hewn walls. He'd pulled out his strongbox, the one he kept hidden under a loose floorboard, and counted what was inside. $83, his savings from 2 years of careful ranching. Money he'd been setting aside for Lucy's future, for a better house someday, for schooling when she got older. Now that money might have to go toward a lawyer, toward fighting a legal battle he wasn't sure he could win. He closed the box and rubbed his eyes. The smart thing would be to take Emmett to the nearest town, find someone else to take him in, let it be someone else's problem. But Jesse had stopped being smart the moment he'd looked into that boy's empty eyes. The next morning brought frost and a visitor Jesse was glad to see. Dr. Henry Bridger rode up just after breakfast, his medical bag strapped to his saddle, his weathered face creased with concern. "Jesse." Doc dismounted stiffly. His joints weren't what they used to be, 62 years of hard living taking their toll. "Heard you had some excitement yesterday." News travels fast. Old Morrison was in town when Crane rode through asking questions. He came to my office right after, said you might need help. Jesse nodded toward the cabin. "Got a boy inside who's been through hell. Could use your eyes on him." They found Emmett in the kitchen, helping Lucy wash dishes. The boy froze when he saw Doc, his whole body going rigid with fear. "It's all right," Jesse said quietly. "This is Doc Bridger. He's a friend. Just wants to make sure you're healthy." Emmett's eyes darted between them, looking for the trap. Doc set his bag down and pulled out a chair, sitting slowly. He didn't approach the boy, just sat there, hands visible, making himself small and non-threatening. "Son, I've been doctoring folks in these parts for 30 years. Treated Jesse here when he broke his arm falling off a horse. Delivered Miss Lucy when she came into this world. I'm not here to hurt you, just want to help." Something in Doc's voice, calm and steady as bedrock, made Emmett's shoulders drop an inch. "Okay." The examination took 20 minutes. Doc was thorough but gentle, and with every piece of clothing removed, his expression grew darker. Jesse stood by the window, giving them space, but he could see Doc's jaw tightening. When it was done, Doc helped Emmett back into his shirt and turned to Jesse. "Can I speak with you outside?" They stepped onto the porch. The morning sun was bright, but it did nothing to warm the chill in Jesse's chest. Doc's voice was low and hard. "That boy's been tortured, Jesse. No other word for it. He's got healed fractures in 3 ribs. Rope burns on his wrist that scarred over, burns on his feet from walking on hot ground without shoes, and his back." Doc's hands clenched into fists. His back looks like someone used a whip on him, multiple times. Jesse's vision went red at the edges. "How bad?" "Bad enough that I want to ride to Austin and put a bullet in Silas Crane myself." Doc took a breath, forcing calm. "But that won't help the boy. What will help is getting him away from that monster permanently. That's the plan. Crane's got legal papers, you know that, right? Judge Whitmore signed guardianship documents 3 years ago. Unless we can prove abuse and get those papers voided, the law's on Crane's side. Then we'll prove it." Doc nodded. "I'll write up a medical report, document every injury. That'll help in court. But Jesse, you need to understand what you're up against. Whitmore's been on the bench 20 years. He doesn't like being told he made a mistake. And Crane's got money. Money buys influence. I don't care how much influence he's got. That boy's not going back." Doc studied him for a long moment. "Catherine would be proud of you." The words hit Jesse like a fist. He turned away, blinking hard. Catherine would have brought him home without thinking twice. That's why she married you. Recognized a good heart under all that stubborn. They stood in silence for a while, watching Lucy and Emmett through the window. The children were playing some game with stones, Lucy explaining the rules while Emmett listened with quiet attention. "What else can you tell me about him?" Doc asked. "Says he was with Crane's gang for 3 years. There's 20-some other kids still there, working on railroad construction." "Jesus." Doc's voice was hollow. "How many have died?" Emmett didn't say. "But from the way he talks, more than a few. We need to get the law involved. Real law, not Whitmore's brand of justice. Working on it." Jesse paused. "You know Marshal Tom Hastings? Federal marshal out of Austin? By reputation. Good man from what I hear. I think he'd listen if we brought him evidence? Only one way to find out." Doc left an hour later with promises to finish the medical report within 2 days. Jesse watched him ride away, then turned back to the cabin. He had work to do, cattle to check, fences to mend. The everyday tasks that kept a ranch running. But his mind was already planning. Thinking 3 moves ahead, the way his father had taught him to play chess. If Crane came back with papers, Jesse needed counterpapers, evidence, witnesses, a case strong enough that even a corrupt judge couldn't ignore it. That evening, after supper, Jesse sat the children down at the table. "Emmett, I need you to tell me everything about Crane's operation, every detail you can remember." The boy's face went pale. "I don't want to remember, I know. But if we're going to fight this, we need ammunition." Lucy took Emmett's hand. "I'll stay right here with you." Emmett looked at her, then at Jesse. Something shifted in his expression, a kind of desperate courage. "Okay." The story that spilled out over the next hour made Jesse's blood run cold. Emmett spoke in a flat, emotionless voice, the words coming like he was reciting facts that had happened to someone else. The railroad gang operated 60 miles west, in country so remote that screams wouldn't carry. Crane had a contract to lay track through the hill country, and he'd found a way to do it cheap. No adult workers with their demands for fair pay and safe conditions. Just children, orphans and runaways that nobody would miss. They worked from before dawn until after dark, hauling railroad ties that weighed more than they did, driving spikes until their hands bled, clearing brush in 100-degree heat with no shade and barely enough water to keep them alive. The food was cornmeal mush in the morning, beans at night. Sometimes there'd be salt pork if Crane was in a good mood. But if you worked too slow, if you complained, if you showed weakness, you didn't eat. And the punishments. Emmett's voice finally cracked when he talked about the punishments. There was a boy named Samuel. He was 9, strong for his age. But one day a railroad tie fell wrong and crushed his leg, broke it in 3 places. We could hear the bones snap. Emmett stopped, swallowing hard. "What happened to Samuel?" Jesse asked quietly. Crane said a doctor would cost too much. Said the boy just needed to rest. But there was infection. We could smell it after a few days. Samuel screamed for 3 nights straight. Then he went quiet. Then he died. Lucy's hand had gone white where it gripped Emmett's. Emmett continued, his voice barely a whisper now. There was another boy, Daniel. He was 11. He tried to run once, about a year ago. Crane's men caught him 2 miles out. They brought him back and he stopped, his whole body shaking. Jesse wanted to tell him to stop, that he didn't need to hear more. But he did need to hear it, because this was what they were fighting against. What did they do to Daniel? They tied him to the railroad tracks, not across them, but along them, tied his hands and feet to the rails, and left him there overnight. It was November. Cold. We could hear him crying, begging. But Crane said anyone who tried to help him would take his place. Emmett's tears were flowing freely now. In the morning, Daniel couldn't talk anymore, couldn't hardly move. His fingers and toes were black from the cold. He lived another month, but he was never right again. Then one morning we woke up and he was just gone. Crane said he'd run away again. But we knew. We all knew. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Jesse's hands were clenched so tight, his nails cut into his palms. He forced himself to breathe, to think past the rage. How many kids have died, Emmett? I don't know for sure. More than 5, maybe 10. Some before I got there. Crane buries them out in the brush. No markers, no names. And your brother, Billy? Emmett's face crumpled. Billy's 12. He's been there longer than me, 4 years. He tried to protect me when I first came, took beatings that were meant for me, gave me his food when I was too weak to work. The night I ran, Billy helped me. He hit one of the guards with a shovel so I could slip away. I heard Crane shouting, heard Billy screaming. Then I ran, and I didn't look back. The boy's voice broke completely. I don't even know if he's alive. I left him there. I left my brother. Lucy threw her arms around Emmett, and Jesse moved to kneel beside them both. You didn't have a choice, son. You did what you had to do to survive. But Billy, we'll find out what happened to Billy. I promise you that. It was a promise Jesse didn't know if he could keep, but looking at this child's devastated face, he had to try. The next 2 days passed in tense preparation. Doc Bridger delivered the medical report, 12 pages of detailed documentation that read like a catalog of horrors. Jesse read it once, his jaw getting tighter with every paragraph, then locked it in his strongbox. On the 3rd day, Jesse made a decision. We're going to town, all 3 of us. Lucy looked up from the book she was reading to Emmett. What for, Pa? Need to send a telegram and talk to Reverend Cross. The ride to redemption took 2 hours. Jesse kept them at an easy pace, watching the horizon. He'd brought the Winchester, and it rested across his saddle within easy reach. Emmett rode behind Jesse, his thin arms wrapped around Jesse's waist. The boy hadn't said much since the night he'd told his story. Something had broken open in him, and now he was quieter than ever. Not the quiet of fear, but the quiet of exhaustion, like he'd been carrying a weight for 3 years and finally set it down. Redemption Town was busier than it had been on Thanksgiving week. Saturday brought farmers and ranchers from the surrounding counties, and Main Street was crowded with wagons and horses. Jesse stopped first at the telegraph office. He'd written out the message carefully the night before. Marshall Hastings, stop. Austin, Texas, stop. Urgent matter, child welfare, stop. Evidence of forced labor and murder, stop. Request immediate assistance, stop. Jesse McKenzie, Redemption, Texas, stop. The telegraph operator, a nervous man named Sykes, read it twice. This is serious business, Mr. McKenzie. That's why I'm sending it. You understand this'll stir up trouble? Crane's got friends. Then his friends can explain why they're protecting a man who murders children. Sykes swallowed hard and nodded. I'll send it right away. Jesse paid and led the children out. Their next stop was the white clapboard church at the end of Main Street. Reverend Samuel Cross was in his office, a small room behind the sanctuary that smelled of old books and pipe tobacco. He was 58 years old, with white hair and kind eyes that had seen their share of suffering. Jesse. The Reverend stood, offering his hand. And Miss Lucy. He turned his gaze to Emmett. And you must be the boy I've been hearing about. Emmett nodded, shy. Come in, all of you. Sit. They settled into the worn chairs. The Reverend poured water from a pitcher and handed glasses around. I heard about the confrontation at your ranch. Half the county's talking about it. Let them talk. Cross smiled. That's one way to handle it. But talk isn't your biggest problem, is it? No, Jesse leaned forward. Crane's got legal papers. Says he's the boy's guardian. I need help fighting that. What kind of help? Testimony. Character witness. Someone respected who can stand in front of a judge and say, I'm fit to raise this child. The Reverend looked at Emmett, really looked at him, took in the too thin frame, the old fear lurking in his eyes, the way he sat close to Lucy like she was a shield. What did they do to you, son? Emmett's voice was barely audible. Bad things. Cross's jaw tightened. He turned back to Jesse. I'll testify. I'll stand in front of Judge Whitmore himself and say you're 10 times the man Silas Crane will ever be. Thank you. But Jesse, you need to prepare yourself. Whitmore is not known for changing his mind. Once he makes a ruling, he sticks to it, even when he's wrong. Then we'll make him see he's wrong. The Reverend studied him for a long moment. Catherine would have done exactly this, you know, brought home a child who needed help, fought heaven and earth to keep them safe. The mention of his wife hit Jesse like it always did, sharp and sudden. I know, she'd be proud of you. Jesse didn't trust himself to speak. He just nodded. They left the church with Cross's promise ringing in their ears. The Reverend would write a letter of support and be ready to testify when the time came. One more ally, one more piece in place. But as they walked back toward the wagon, Jesse saw something that made his blood run cold. A man stood beside their wagon, tall and thin with a scar down his cheek. Boone, one of Crane's men. The man's hand rested on the grip of his pistol. Jesse pushed Lucy and Emmett behind him. You're a long way from Crane's camp. Boone smiled, showing tobacco-stained teeth. Just delivering a message. Mr. Crane wants you to know he filed papers with Judge Whitmore yesterday. Court hearing set for 2 weeks from today, December 10th. Jesse kept his voice level. We'll be there. You can save everyone a lot of trouble by just handing over the boy now. Not going to happen. Boone's smile faded. You're making a mistake, McKenzie. Crane's got the law on his side. He's got money. He's got friends in high places. What have you got? A dead wife? And a hardscrabble ranch? The insult about Catherine made Jesse's hands clench, but he forced himself to stay calm. I've got something Crane doesn't. I've got the truth. Truth doesn't win in court. Money does. Then, I guess we'll see. Boone spat in the dirt. 2 weeks, McKenzie. Enjoy them. Because after that, you'll be in jail for kidnapping, and the boy will be back where he belongs. He turned and walked away, his boots loud on the wooden sidewalk. Jesse stood watching until Boone disappeared around a corner. Then he helped the children into the wagon and started the long ride home. The tension followed them like a shadow. Lucy was quiet, her usual chatter subdued. Emmett stared at his hands, his shoulders hunched. It wasn't until they were halfway home that Emmett spoke. Maybe I should just go back. Jesse pulled the wagon to a stop. He turned to look at the boy. What? If I go back, Crane will leave you alone. You won't get in trouble. Lucy will be safe. Emmett, I'm not worth all this. I'm just a kid nobody wants. I should never have let you help me." Jesse climbed down from the wagon and walked around to where Emmett sat. He reached up and lifted the boy down, setting him on the ground. Then he knelt, so they were eye to eye. "Now you listen to me. You are worth fighting for. You're worth every bit of trouble that's coming, and you're not. Nobody wants you. Lucy wants you. I want you. But Crane has the law. He has money. He'll win. Maybe he will. Or maybe he won't. But either way, we're going to fight. Because some things are worth fighting for even when you might lose." Emmett's eyes filled with tears. "Why? Why do you care so much?" Jesse thought about his answer. About Thomas dying while he stood helpless. About Catherine lying cold in the ground. About 7 years of loneliness and grief. About this boy who'd cracked something open in his chest that he'd thought was sealed forever. "Because you remind me what it means to be brave. You survived 3 years in hell. You escaped when most kids would have given up. You're still standing even though everything in your life has tried to break you. That's the kind of courage most men never find." He put his hands on Emmett's shoulders. "And because my daughter asked me if we could keep you. And looking at you now, I can't imagine saying no." Emmett threw his arms around Jesse's neck and held on like a drowning man clutching driftwood. Jesse held him back, this fragile boy who'd somehow become his son in the space of a few days. Lucy climbed down from the wagon and wrapped her arms around both of them. "We're a family now," she said fiercely, "and families don't give up." They stood there in the middle of the prairie, 3 people bound together by choice rather than blood, and Jesse felt something he hadn't felt in 7 years. Hope. The days before the hearing passed in a blur of preparation. Jesse worked from dawn to dusk, trying to keep the ranch running while also building their case. He wrote letters to everyone who'd known Catherine, asking for character references. He rode to neighboring ranches, gathering support. The response surprised him. Neighbors he barely knew showed up offering help, money, testimony, whatever Jesse needed. It turned out the story of the boy Jesse had rescued had spread through the county like wildfire, and people were angry at Crane, angry at the system that had let children suffer, angry at their own inaction. They wanted to help now, wanted to be part of making things right. Doc Bridger came by regularly to check on Emmett. The boy was gaining weight, color returning to his cheeks. The fear was still there lurking in his eyes, but it was fading, being replaced slowly with something that looked like trust. Lucy was the one who truly worked magic. She treated Emmett like the brother she'd always wanted, dragged him on adventures around the ranch, taught him to read with stubborn patience, made him laugh with her terrible jokes and endless stories. Jesse watched them together and saw Catherine in his daughter. The same fierce love, the same refusal to let darkness win. 1 week before the hearing, Jesse received a telegram. Arriving December 8th. Stop. Marshal Tom Hastings. Stop. Relief flooded through him. The federal marshal was coming. That meant someone with real authority would hear their case, someone who couldn't be bought by Crane's money. He showed the telegram to Doc Bridger when the old man came by that evening. "This is good," Doc said. "Hastings has a reputation for being incorruptible. If anyone can see through Crane's lies, it's him. We still have to convince Judge Whitmore. One battle at a time." That night, Jesse sat on the porch long after the children had gone to bed. The December air was cold, stars sharp and bright overhead. He thought about the hearing coming in 7 days, about standing in front of a judge and fighting for the right to keep Emmett, about what would happen if they lost. He heard the door open behind him, turned to see Emmett stepping out, wrapped in a blanket. "Can't sleep?" The boy shook his head and came to sit beside Jesse on the steps. "Keep thinking about Billy." Jesse had been thinking about Billy too, about Emmett's brother, still trapped in Crane's camp, still suffering. "When this is over, we'll find him. We'll get him out." "What if it's too late? What if he's already?" "Don't think like that. Your brother's tough. He survived 4 years. He'll make it through this." Emmett pulled the blanket tighter. "He saved my life, you know, more than once. When I first got to the camp, I was 5 years old, didn't know anything. Billy was 9, and he took care of me, taught me how to survive, how to stay quiet, how to make myself invisible when Crane was angry." Jesse's throat tightened. "Sounds like a good brother." "The best. That's why I feel so guilty. I got out. I'm safe. But he's still there. We're going to change that." Emmett looked up at him. "You really think we can win?" Jesse wanted to lie, wanted to promise that everything would be fine, but this boy deserved honesty. "I don't know. Crane's got advantages we don't have, but we've got something he doesn't." "What?" "The truth. And people who care enough to fight for it. Is that enough? Sometimes. Not always. But it's all we've got, so we make it be enough." They sat in silence for a while, looking out at the dark prairie. "Jesse?" "Yeah?" "Thank you. For everything. For taking me in. For fighting for me. For making me feel like maybe I matter." Jesse's chest went tight. "You do matter, Emmett. More than you know." The boy leaned against Jesse's shoulder, and Jesse put his arm around him. They sat like that until Emmett's breathing evened out and he dozed off. Jesse carried him inside and tucked him into the loft beside Lucy. Then he stood there for a long moment, looking at these two children who'd become his world. Whatever happened in that courtroom, he'd given them this. These days of safety and warmth and love. These moments of being a family. And if the judge ruled against them, if they tried to take Emmett away, Jesse would fight. With lawyers first. With words and evidence and testimony. But if that didn't work, he'd fight another way. Because some things were worth breaking the law for. Some things were worth risking everything. December 8th arrived with frost on the ground and ice in the water troughs. Jesse was breaking the ice when he heard hoofbeats. He looked up to see a single rider approaching. A man in his mid-40s wearing a federal marshal's badge and carrying himself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd faced down worse than Silas Crane, Marshal Hastings. The marshal dismounted and extended his hand. "Mr. Mackenzie, got your telegram. Appreciate you coming all this way." Hastings looked around the ranch, taking in the well-maintained buildings, the healthy livestock, the smoke rising from the cabin chimney. "This is a good place. Feels like a home. Trying to keep it that way. That's what I'm here to help with. Why don't we talk inside? I'd like to meet the boy at the center of all this." They went inside where Lucy and Emmett were having breakfast. The children looked up when the marshal entered, Lucy curious, Emmett wary. Jesse made introductions. Hastings sat down at the table and accepted the coffee Jesse poured. "Emmett, I've read Mr. Mackenzie's telegram, and Doc Bridger sent me his medical report, but I need to hear it from you. What happened at Crane's camp?" Emmett glanced at Jesse, who nodded encouragement. The boy started talking. The same story he'd told Jesse, but with more details now. Names, dates, specific incidents. His voice stayed level, but his hands shook. Hastings listened without interrupting. When Emmett finished, the marshal sat back in his chair. "You're a brave kid. Braver than most men I know." Emmett ducked his head. Hastings turned to Jesse. "I'll be honest with you. This is going to be hard to prove. Crane's operation is in federal territory, which gives me jurisdiction. But the guardianship papers are a state matter. Judge Whitmore signed them, and state judges don't like federal marshals telling them they made a mistake. What can you do? I can investigate the camp, document what I find. If there's evidence of murder or forced labor, I can arrest Crane on federal charges. That might give us leverage in the custody case. How long will that take? The hearing's in 2 days. I'll ride out to the camp today. If I push hard, I can be back by tomorrow night." Jesse stood. "I'm coming with you. Mr. Mackenzie, that's my son's brother out there, and 20-some other kids. I'm coming." Hastings studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but you follow my lead. This is a federal investigation, and I can't have civilians complicating things. Understood." Jesse turned to the children. "Lucy, you and Emmett stay here. Don't open the door for anyone except Doc Bridger or Reverend Cross. You hear me?" Lucy's chin came up. "We'll be fine, Pa." Jesse knelt and pulled them both into a hug. "I'll be back before you know it." Emmett's voice was small. "Find Billy. Please." "I will." Jesse and Hastings rode out an hour later, pushing their horses hard. The camp was 60 miles west, through rough country. If they rode through the night, they could be there by dawn. They made good time, stopping only to rest the horses. Hastings talked as they rode, asking questions about Crane, about Emmett's story, about Jesse's plans. "You know this could backfire," the marshal said as they paused to water the horses at a creek. "If Whitmore rules against you and you refuse to hand over the boy, they'll arrest you. Let them try. You've got a daughter to think about." "I know. But I've also got a son. 2 sons, if we can find Billy, and I'm not abandoning either one." Hastings shook his head, but there was respect in his eyes. "You're either the bravest man I've met or the biggest fool, probably both." They reached the camp an hour before dawn. Hastings had them hold back in the trees, watching, waiting for enough light to see clearly. What they saw made Jesse's hands clench white on his reins. The camp sprawled across a valley, a collection of ragged tents and crude shelters. A section of railroad track ran through the middle, gleaming in the early light. And around it, moving like ghosts, were children, at least 20 of them, some as young as 6, all thin, all wearing rags, all moving with the mechanical precision of people who'd learned that hesitation brought pain. As the sun rose higher, Jesse could see the guards, 3 men with rifles, walking the perimeter. One of them was Clay, the short, heavy man who'd ridden to Jesse's ranch with Crane. "Where's Crane?" Hastings whispered. Jesse scanned the camp and spotted him. The scarred man stood near a large tent, shouting orders. Even from a distance, Jesse could hear the cruelty in his voice. "We need to get closer." Hastings checked his rifle. "See if we can identify Billy, and document conditions." They tethered their horses and moved through the brush on foot. Hastings had a camera in his saddlebag, one of the new portable models. He set it up behind a rock and started taking photographs. Jesse watched the children work, watched them strain under loads too heavy for their small frames, watched guards hit a boy who'd stumbled, knocking him to the ground. His rage was a living thing, burning in his chest. Then he saw him. A boy taller than the others, maybe 12 years old, dark hair, moving with a limp, one eye swollen shut. Billy. Jesse knew it in his bones. This was Emmett's brother. He pointed and Hastings nodded. The marshal took several photographs documenting Billy's injuries, the working conditions, the guards with weapons. "We have enough," Hastings whispered. "Let's go." "Wait." Jesse was watching Billy. The boy had stopped working. He'd turned toward the trees, toward where Jesse and Hastings hid, and his one good eye was staring right at them. 2 weeks had passed in a blur of preparation. Jesse had written letters, gathered witnesses, and worked with Samuel Graves to build their case. Doc Bridger had finalized his medical report. Reverend Cross had rallied support throughout the county, and Marshal Hastings had arrived 3 days ago, ready to gather the evidence they needed. The morning of December 8th, Jesse and the marshal had ridden west toward Crane's camp. The ride back from Crane's camp had taken them through the darkest hours before dawn. Jesse's body ached from 2 days in the saddle, his eyes burned from lack of sleep, but his mind wouldn't rest. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Billy's face, that warning shake of the head, the silent plea for them to escape before the guards noticed. A 12-year-old boy more concerned about protecting strangers than saving himself. Marshal Hastings rode beside him in silence, both men lost in their thoughts. The photographs in the marshal's saddlebag felt like they weighed 100 pounds. Evidence of horrors that shouldn't exist in a civilized country. Children worked like animals, beaten like dogs, buried like trash when they couldn't work anymore. The first rays of sunlight were breaking over the prairie when they finally saw the ranch. Smoke rose from the chimney, a promise of warmth and safety. Jesse's chest tightened at the sight. Home. Lucy and Emmett were at the kitchen table when they walked in. The children looked like they'd been sitting there all night, waiting. Dark circles shadowed Lucy's eyes, and Emmett's face was drawn tight with fear. Pa! Lucy launched herself at Jesse before he'd even closed the door. He caught her, held her close, breathing in the smell of her hair. Soap and wood smoke and innocence. I'm here, Lucy girl. Everything's all right. But Emmett hadn't moved. The boy sat frozen at the table, his eyes fixed on Marshal Hastings. His hands gripped the edge of the wood so hard his knuckles had gone white. Did you find him? The words came out barely above a whisper. Did you find Billy? Jesse knelt so he was eye level with Emmett. He reached out and took the boy's cold hands in his own. We found him. He's alive, son. The transformation in Emmett's face was almost painful to witness. Relief crashed over him like a wave, and his whole body seemed to collapse inward. The rigid control he'd been holding for days, maybe years, finally broke. Tears streamed down his cheeks. Is he okay? Is he hurt? Jesse chose his words with care. Billy was alive, but the boy had been through hell. The injuries they'd seen even from a distance told a story Jesse wished didn't exist. He's surviving. He's hurt, but he's on his feet. He's working. And Emmett, he saw us. He saw you? He looked right at us, knew we were there. And you know what he did first? Emmett shook his head, unable to speak. He warned us. Soon as he saw us hiding in the trees, he shook his head. Told us to get down before the guards spotted us. He could have called out, could have tried to escape with us, but his first thought was making sure we stayed safe. That's Billy. Emmett's voice broke on his brother's name. Always thinking about everyone else. Marshal Hastings stepped forward, setting his saddlebag down carefully on the table. The leather was worn from years of use, the brass buckles tarnished. Inside were the photographs that might save Emmett's life or condemn him to return to hell. Your brother's one of the bravest people I've ever seen, Emmett, and I've seen a lot in my years. He's been in that camp 4 years, facing things that would break most men, but he's still standing, still protecting others. That takes a kind of courage you can't teach. Can we bring him here? When can we get him? Jesse glanced at Hastings. The marshal's jaw tightened, and Jesse saw the same frustration he felt reflected in the older man's eyes. They both knew the answer, and they both hated it. That's what we need to talk about. The hearings today, in 4 hours. We have to win custody of you first. Once that's done, once you're legally safe, then the marshal can raid the camp and bring Billy home. Emmett's face fell, the brief spark of hope dimming like a candle in the wind. So he has to stay there longer. Because of me. No. Jesse gripped the boy's shoulders, feeling how thin they still were despite weeks of good food. Because of Crane. None of this is your fault. You didn't put Billy in that camp. You didn't beat him or starve him or make him work like a slave. Crane did that. And Crane's going to pay for it. But what if something happens before you can get him out? What if Crane figures out someone was watching? What if he hurts Billy worse? The questions hit too close to Jesse's own fears. He'd been thinking the same things during the long ride home. Crane was smart, paranoid. If he suspected federal marshals were sniffing around, he might move the camp, hide the evidence, or worse, eliminate witnesses who could testify against him. Billy's tough, Jesse said, forcing confidence into his voice that he didn't quite feel. He survived 4 years in that place. He can survive a few more days. Emmett pulled away, wrapping his arms around himself like he was trying to hold his body together by force of will. I should just go back. If I go back, Crane will leave you alone. He'll stop looking. Billy will be safe. Emmett, I'm not worth all this trouble. I'm just a kid nobody wanted in the first place. You should have left me at that market. Jesse stood and crossed to the stove, pouring coffee with hands that shook slightly from exhaustion and emotion. He took a long drink, letting the bitter heat ground him. Then he turned back to Emmett, and when he spoke, his voice was firm. Let me tell you something about worth, son. Your worth isn't determined by who wanted you or didn't want you. It's not about how much money you have or what you can do. Your worth comes from right here. He tapped his chest over his heart. From the fact that you're a human being, a child. And every child deserves to be safe, deserves to be fed and clothed and loved. That's not something you have to earn. It's something you're born with. Lucy had moved to stand beside Emmett. She took his hand in both of hers, the way she did when she was being especially serious. You're my brother. That makes you worth everything. Emmett looked at her, then at Jesse. Tears still streamed down his face, but something else was there too. A fragile, desperate kind of hope that hurt to look at because it was so easily broken. What if we lose? What if the judge says I have to go back? Then we'll deal with that when it happens. But Emmett, we're going into that courtroom with the truth, with proof, with people who'll stand up and say what's right. That has to count for something. Marshal Hastings cleared his throat, pulling a pocket watch from his vest. The gold casing caught the lamplight. We should start preparing. I need to develop these photographs properly for court. Mr. Mackenzie, you should clean up, get into your court clothes. And Emmett, you need to be ready to testify, to tell your story one more time. Emmett nodded slowly, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. I can do that. Jesse sent the children to wash up while he and Hastings laid out their evidence on the kitchen table. The photographs were damning even in their undeveloped state. Hastings had taken more than 20 images, each one documenting a different aspect of the horror: children laboring under armed guards, close-ups of injuries visible even from a distance. The harsh conditions of the camp laid bare for anyone to see: railroad ties stacked like cordwood, the metal box they called the oven, sitting in full sun, and Billy, recognizable even in the grainy image, his face turned toward the camera with that one good eye. Will it be enough? Jesse asked quietly. Hastings rubbed his face with both hands, a gesture of exhaustion and frustration. He suddenly looked every one of his 45 years, and then some. I wish I could promise you it will be, but judges are unpredictable creatures. Whitmore's had that guardianship paperwork on file for 3 years. Admitting it was a mistake means admitting he failed those children. Men in power don't like admitting failure. It makes them look weak. So what do? We tell the truth. We show him evidence he can't ignore. And we pray his conscience is stronger than his pride. The next hours passed in a strange suspension of time, like being underwater, where everything moved slowly and sounds were muffled. Jesse washed and shaved, his hands moving through familiar motions, while his mind raced ahead to the courtroom, to standing before a judge, to watching Emmett testify, to the moment when Whitmore would decide whether this child lived or died. Because that's what it was, a life or death decision. Sending Emmett back to Crane would be a death sentence, as sure as a hanging. He pulled his suit from the trunk in his bedroom, the suit he'd married Catherine in, the suit he'd worn to her funeral. Navy blue wool, well made but showing its age now. The fabric smelled of cedar and memory and all the years that had passed since he'd last worn it. He dressed slowly, his fingers fumbling with buttons and collar. The mirror above the wash basin showed him a stranger. 7 years had carved lines into his face that hadn't been there when Catherine died, had turned his hair gray at the temples, had put shadows under his eyes that never quite went away, even after a full night's sleep. But there was something else there now, something that hadn't been there before Emmett, a kind of fierce determination, a purpose. He was fighting for something again, someone who needed him, someone who'd reminded him what it meant to be a father. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Doc Bridger's voice called through the wood. "Jesse, we're here." Jesse opened the door to find his yard filling with people. Doc Bridger had arrived first, riding in his buggy with Reverend Cross beside him. The Reverend carried his Bible in one hand and a leather folder in the other, the folder containing the letter of support he'd labored over for 2 days. Behind them came more wagons, more horses, more people than Jesse had expected or hoped for. Neighbors he barely knew, ranchers from adjoining properties who'd heard what was happening and wanted to help. The school teacher, Miss Clara Hayes, who'd taught Lucy her letters and numbers. Old Morrison from the hardware store, his weathered face set in determined lines. They gathered in Jesse's yard, this unlikely army of witnesses, all willing to stand up in court and say that Jesse Mackenzie was a good man, that Emmett Cole deserved better than what Silas Crane had given him, that sometimes the law needed to bend to accommodate what was right. A woman Jesse recognized as Lottie O'Brien, who ran the boarding house in town, pressed a cloth bundle into Jesse's hands. It was warm, and the smell of fresh bread wafted from it. Sandwiches for the children. Court days run long, and they'll need something in their stomachs. Can't have them fainting from hunger. Thank you, Lottie. Jesse's throat was tight. You didn't have to do this. She gripped his arm with surprising strength for a woman her size, her eyes fierce and bright. You're doing the right thing, Jesse. Don't let anyone tell you different. That boy needs you. And from what I've seen these past weeks, you need him too. You've been half alive since Catherine died. This boy, he's bringing you back to life. The words hit deeper than Jesse expected, cutting through all his defenses to touch something raw and true. He swallowed hard and nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Doc Bridger approached with his medical bag, the same worn leather satchel he'd carried for 30 years. I've got the full report written up, 12 pages documenting every injury, every scar, every sign of abuse. The judge can't ignore medical evidence. Reverend Cross joined them, his white hair bright in the morning sun. I've spoken to half the county about this case. Everyone's talking about it. What Crane's doing, it's an abomination. There's not a decent person in 3 counties who doesn't want to see that man hang. But wanting and doing are 2 different things, the doc said grimly. Whitmore's been on the bench 20 years. He doesn't like being told he was wrong. Then we'll have to convince him he was, Jesse said, because I'm not giving Emmett back. I don't care what the judge says. That boy's not going back to that camp. The 3 men looked at him. Doc Bridger spoke carefully. Jesse, if you defy a court order, they'll arrest you. They'll take Emmett anyway, and you'll be in jail. Lucy will have no one. Then I guess I better win. They made the journey to town in a convoy that stretched out across the prairie like a funeral procession. Jesse's wagon led the way. Lucy and Emmett squeezed close beside him on the bench. Marshal Hastings rode alongside, the precious photographs now properly developed and secured in a leather portfolio. Behind them came the others, a dozen wagons and twice as many riders, all heading toward redemption and the reckoning that awaited. The morning was cold, frost still clinging to the grass in shadowed places despite the sun's climb. The sky was that brilliant blue that only came in winter, sharp and clear and pitiless. Jesse's breath fogged in the air, and beside him, Emmett shivered despite the heavy coat Jesse had bought him. Emmett hadn't spoken since they'd left the ranch. He sat rigid between Jesse and Lucy, his eyes fixed straight ahead like a soldier marching to battle. Jesse could feel the boy trembling, could see the white-knuckled grip he had on the edge of the wagon seat. You remember what we talked about? Jesse asked quietly. Tell the truth. Don't let them make me angry. Look at the judge when I talk. That's right. And remember, I'll be right there. Lucy will be right there. You're not alone in this, son. You'll never be alone again. Lucy leaned her head against Emmett's shoulder, the gesture simple and full of love. We're all together. That's what matters. Redemption came into view as they crested the final rise, the courthouse rising above the other buildings like a judge looking down on his domain. 2 stories of red brick and white columns, built 10 years ago when the county had money and ambition. The seat of law and justice in 3 counties. Today it would decide Emmett's fate. The courtroom was already filling when they arrived, and Jesse was stunned by the crowd. He'd expected some curiosity, but nothing like this. Every bench was packed with people, shoulder to shoulder. More stood along the walls, 3 deep in places. The balcony was full of spectators leaning over the railing to see. Word had spread like wildfire. A rancher taking on a railroad boss, and a child's life hanging in the balance. The kind of David and Goliath story that people couldn't resist. Silas Crane sat at the plaintiff's table with his lawyer, and the sight of him made Jesse's hands clench into fists. Harrison Lowell was a man in his 50s, impeccably dressed in a suit that probably cost more than Jesse made in 6 months. His hair was perfect, not a strand out of place. His manner confident, almost bored, like this was just another day at the office. This was a man who won cases, who knew how to manipulate juries and judges, who'd built a career defending railroad companies against accusations of wrongdoing, who'd never lost a case involving labor disputes. Crane turned as Jesse entered, their eyes meeting across the crowded courtroom. The scarred man smiled, slow and cruel, the smile of a predator who knew his prey was trapped. "Should have taken my offer, Mackenzie. Too late now. You're going to lose, and when you do, I'm going to make sure that boy knows it was your fault. Your pride that sent him back to me." Jesse didn't respond. Couldn't respond without saying something that would get him thrown out before the hearing even started. He just guided Emmett and Lucy to their seats, where Samuel Graves waited. Their lawyer looked old and tired in the harsh morning light streaming through the tall windows. His suit was worn at the elbows, his collar slightly frayed, but his eyes were sharp, alert, taking in everything. "Are we ready?" Graves asked quietly, his voice pitched low so only Jesse could hear. Jesse thought about all the preparation, the evidence gathered, the witnesses assembled, the photographs that showed horrors no child should endure, the medical report documenting years of abuse, the testimony Emmett would give, reliving trauma that should never have happened. Ready as we'll ever be. Good, because Lowell's going to attack from every angle. He'll say you're a kidnapper who stole another man's legal property. That Emmett's a liar making up stories to avoid honest work. That Crane is a misunderstood benefactor trying to help unfortunate children. We can't let him control the narrative. What do we need to do? Let the evidence speak. Let Emmett tell his story in his own words. And trust that Judge Whitmore has enough humanity left to do the right thing. And if he doesn't? Then we deal with that when it happens. The clerk stood, a thin man with spectacles and a voice that carried surprisingly well. All rise for the Honorable Judge Nathaniel Whitmore. Everyone rose as the judge entered through the door behind the bench. Whitmore was in his mid-50s with iron-gray hair and a face weathered by 2 decades on the bench. He moved deliberately, his robes whispering as he settled into his chair behind the bench. His eyes swept the packed gallery, taking in the crowd, the tension, the weight of expectation hanging in the air. His expression revealed nothing. "Be seated." The room filled with the sound of people sitting, a rustle of fabric and creak of wood. Then, silence, complete and heavy, like the moment before a storm breaks. "We're here today regarding a custody dispute. Mr. Silas Crane claims legal guardianship of the minor child Emmett Cole, based on documents signed by this court 3 years ago. Mr. Jesse Mackenzie contests this guardianship and petitions for custody himself." Whitmore paused, letting his gaze sweep both tables. This is not a trivial matter. A child's future, perhaps his life, hangs in the balance. I expect both parties to conduct themselves with appropriate gravity and respect for this court. Mr. Lowell, you may present your opening statement. Harrison Lowell rose smoothly, buttoning his jacket with practiced ease. He approached the bench with the confidence of a man who knew he was about to win, who'd won so many times before that victory was simply expected. Your Honor, this case is fundamentally about the rule of law, about whether legal documents and court orders mean anything, or whether any man can simply ignore them when he finds them inconvenient. He gestured to the stack of documents on his table. 3 years ago, my client entered into a legal guardianship arrangement for young Emmett Cole, a child who had nothing and no one. This court reviewed that arrangement. This court approved it. The paperwork is in order. The signatures are valid. Everything was done according to law. Lowell walked toward the jury box, even though there was no jury, his movements theatrical and calculated. Under that guardianship, Mr. Crane has provided food, shelter, and vocational training to a child who otherwise would have died on the streets. He gave that boy a home, a purpose, a future. That's not abuse, Your Honor. That's charity of the highest order. In November of this year, Emmett Cole made a choice. He chose to run away from Mr. Crane's lawful care. He stole property, specifically food and a blanket, and fled into the night. When Mr. Crane located the boy at Mr. Mackenzie's ranch, he attempted to resolve the matter peacefully and reasonably. Lowell's voice grew harder. Mr. Mackenzie refused. He has held the child unlawfully ever since, in clear violation of valid court orders. This is not about child welfare, Your Honor. This is about a man who thinks the law doesn't apply to him, who took another man's legal ward and refuses to return him despite having no legal right whatsoever. He turned to face the gallery, his voice rising to reach the back of the crowded room. If we allow this, where does it end? Can anyone simply take a child they feel sorry for? Can anyone ignore legal guardianship because they disagree with how a child is raised? The law exists for a reason, Your Honor. It provides order, stability, certainty. Without it, we have chaos. Lowell walked back to his table and picked up another document. I have here affidavits from 3 physicians who examined children in Mr. Crane's program. They all attest to the children being healthy and well cared for. I have testimony from local businessmen who've worked with Mr. Crane and found him to be honest and fair. And I have the guardianship papers, properly executed and filed with this court 3 years ago. He set the papers down and looked directly at Jesse. What does Mr. Mackenzie have? Emotion, sentimentality, a bleeding heart. Those are not legal arguments, Your Honor. Those don't override valid court documents. The law is clear. Mr. Crane has every right to the return of his ward. To rule otherwise would be to say that any man can kidnap a child if he believes, in his own judgment, that he can provide better care. That's anarchy, not justice. Lowell sat down, and the courtroom erupted in angry murmurs. People who'd come to support Jesse. People who knew what was happening in that camp was wrong, regardless of what the law said. Whitmore gavelled for silence. Order. I will have order in this courtroom. When the room quieted, he looked at Graves. Mr. Graves, your opening statement. Samuel Graves stood slowly, not with Lowell's theatrical flourish, but with quiet dignity. He approached the bench and stood there for a long moment, just looking at the judge. Your Honor, Mr. Lowell is correct about one thing. This case is about the law, but not the way he thinks. He paused, letting the words settle. There's an old legal principle that goes back to Roman times, malum in esse, wrong in itself. The idea that some acts are so fundamentally, intrinsically wrong that no law can make them right. No court order can legitimize them. No piece of paper can transform evil into good. Slavery was once legal in this country. You could buy and sell human beings like cattle, and courts would enforce those sales. Child labor was once legal, still is in many places. You can work a child to death, and as long as you have the right paperwork, nobody stops you. Graves' voice grew stronger. But just because something is legal doesn't make it right. And just because this court signed papers 3 years ago doesn't mean those papers should stand when we have proof that they were based on lies. He gestured toward Emmett. That boy was 5 years old when Crane took him. 5. He was starving on the streets of San Antonio, desperate enough to go with anyone who promised food. Crane promised him a home, promised him care, promised him a future. What did Crane actually give him? 3 years of slavery. 3 years of beatings and starvation and watching other children die. 3 years of hell that no child should endure. Lowell stood. Objection. Counsel is making inflammatory statements without evidence. Then let's provide the evidence, Graves shot back. Your Honor, I have photographs taken by Federal Marshal Tom Hastings showing the conditions at Crane's camp. I have medical testimony from Dr. Henry Bridger documenting the abuse Emmett suffered. And I have Emmett himself ready to tell this court exactly what happened in that camp. Whitmore leaned forward. You'll have your chance to present evidence, Mr. Graves. Continue your opening. Graves nodded. Your Honor, this court made a mistake 3 years ago. I'm not saying it was intentional. I'm not accusing this court of malice or corruption. I'm saying Crane lied. He presented himself as a charitable man helping orphans. He hid what he was really doing, and this court, acting in good faith, signed papers that gave him legal cover to torture children. Now we have a chance to correct that mistake, to admit that those papers were based on fraud and misrepresentation, to say that no piece of paper, no matter how official it looks, no matter whose signature is on it, gives anyone the right to abuse a child. He walked over to where Emmett sat and put his hand gently on the boy's shoulder. Mr. Mackenzie didn't kidnap this child, Your Honor. He saved him. He saw a boy freezing and starving, and he did what any decent human being should do. He helped. And I'm going to prove to this court that if Emmett Cole is sent back to Silas Crane, it will be a death sentence, because children don't survive that camp. They die there, and they're buried in unmarked graves where nobody will ever find them. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Even the people standing along the walls had stopped shifting. Graves returned to his table. Thank you, Your Honor. Whitmore made a note on the pad in front of him, his face still revealing nothing. Mr. Lowell, call your first witness. Lowell stood, smoothing his vest. The plaintiff calls Silas Crane. Crane rose and walked to the witness stand with the bearing of a man who had nothing to hide. He was a big man, broad across the shoulders, with that scar running down his left cheek like a badge of honor. He placed his hand on the Bible the clerk held out and swore to tell the truth in a voice that carried confidence. Lowell approached with a friendly smile, the smile of one colleague to another. Mr. Crane, please tell the court about your work program for orphaned children. Crane's voice was smooth, reasonable, the voice of a man explaining something simple and obvious. I run a railroad construction operation about 60 miles west of here, in the hill country. It's hard work, but it's honest work. 3 years ago, I saw the problem we have in this territory. Orphaned children living on the streets. Starving. Dying. Nobody caring about them. Nobody taking responsibility. He paused, as if the memory pained him. So I decided to do something about it. I started taking in these children, giving them food and shelter, teaching them skills they could use to make a living. What kind of skills? Railroad construction, how to lay track, how to work with tools, carpentry, basic labor, the kind of skills that will let them find work anywhere in this country. And how many children are currently in your program? 23 at last count. The number varies. Some leave when they turn 14 or 15, ready to work on their own. Others join when I find them abandoned. Do you pay these children wages? Lowell's question was careful, and Crane's answer was practiced. I provide everything they need, food 3 times a day, clothing, shelter, medical care when necessary. That's worth far more than cash wages to a child who had nothing. Tell the court about your relationship with Emmett Cole. Crane's face took on an expression of sadness that might have been convincing if Jesse hadn't known the truth. I found Emmett 3 years ago in San Antonio. He was 5 years old, living in an alley behind a saloon. He was so thin I could count his ribs, eating from trash bins, sleeping in his own filth. It broke my heart. What did you do? I took him in, cleaned him up, fed him, gave him warm clothes and a place to sleep. I treated him like I'd treat my own son, if I had one. And how did he respond to this care? For the first 2 years he did well. He was a good worker, kept his head down, did what he was told. But this past year, he started having trouble, became lazy, stopped working as hard as the other children. What did you do about that? I tried discipline, nothing harsh, just firm guidance. The kind of correction any father would give a wayward child. But Emmett resisted. He became defiant. And then what happened? In November, he ran away, stole food and supplies, and disappeared in the middle of the night. I've been searching for him ever since, worried sick about his welfare. When you found him at Mr. Mackenzie's ranch, what did you do? I asked politely for his return. I showed Mr. Mackenzie the legal guardianship papers. I explained that Emmett was my responsibility, my legal ward. I tried to be reasonable. How did Mr. Mackenzie respond? He refused, threatened me with a rifle, told me to leave his property and never come back. He's held Emmett unlawfully ever since. Lowell nodded, as if this confirmed everything he'd suspected. No further questions, Your Honor. Whitmore looked at Graves. Your witness, counselor. Graves stood and approached Crane slowly. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but sharp as a blade. Mr. Crane, you say you found Emmett on the streets of San Antonio 3 years ago. That's correct. Did you make any attempt to find his family before taking him? He said he had no family. His mother was dead. He was 5 years old. Did you verify this? Check with local authorities? Churches? Anyone who might have been looking for him? Crane's jaw tightened slightly. I did what was necessary to help a child in need, which was nothing. You saw a vulnerable child and you took him, just like you've taken 23 other children. Objection. Counsel is testifying. Sustained. Mr. Graves, ask questions. Graves nodded. Mr. Crane, you testified that you provide food 3 times a day. What exactly do these children eat? Basic food. Cornmeal. Beans. Occasionally meat. How much food per meal? Enough to keep them healthy and working. That's not an answer. How much? Crane shifted in his seat. A bowl of mush in the morning, beans in the evening. That's 2 meals, not 3. Sometimes there's a midday meal if the work allows time for it. So most days, these children eat twice. Is that correct? If they're working hard, they eat well. And if they don't work hard enough by your standards? Crane's face reddened. Then they need to learn discipline. By going hungry? By learning the connection between work and reward. Graves walked to his table and picked up one of Marshal Hastings's photographs. Your Honor, I'd like to introduce Exhibit A, a photograph taken 2 days ago at Mr. Crane's camp by Federal Marshal Tom Hastings. He handed it to the judge. Whitmore studied it, his expression darkening. Mr. Crane, this photograph shows children carrying what appear to be railroad ties while armed men watch them. Can you explain why you need armed guards if these children are there voluntarily? For their protection. The hill country is dangerous. There are outlaws, wild animals. Or is it to prevent the children from escaping? Objection. Overruled. Answer the question, Mr. Crane. The guards ensure the children's safety and provide supervision for dangerous work. Graves picked up another photograph. This image shows what appears to be a metal container sitting in full sun. What is that used for? Storage. Storage of what? Equipment. Tools. Mr. Crane, isn't it true that you lock children inside that container as punishment? Crane's hands gripped the witness stand. That's a lie. Emmett Cole will testify that he was locked inside that box 3 times. That in summer the temperature inside reaches over 100 degrees. That children have passed out from the heat. Is Emmett lying? The boy is mistaken. About being locked in an oven? That's quite a specific mistake. Lowell stood. Objection. The lawyer is badgering the witness. I'll move on. Graves set the photograph down. Mr. Crane, how many children have died while in your custody? The question landed like a thunderclap. The courtroom went absolutely silent. Crane's face went pale, then red. None. No children have died? Not one? There have been industrial accidents. Railroad construction is inherently dangerous work. How many accidents? I don't keep detailed records of. Graves' voice rose. How many children have you buried in unmarked graves behind your camp, Mr. Crane? Objection. Lowell was on his feet. There's no evidence to support this outrageous accusation. Your Honor, Graves said calmly, Federal Marshal Hastings observed what appeared to be graves during his visit to the camp. He's prepared to testify to that fact. Whitmore leaned forward. Is this true, Marshal? Hastings stood from his seat in the gallery. Yes, Your Honor. I observed at least 5 areas of disturbed earth consistent with burial sites. The courtroom erupted, people shouting, women crying. Whitmore's gavel cracked repeatedly. "Order! I will have order!" When the room finally quieted, Graves continued, "Mr. Crane, a boy named Samuel died in your camp approximately 18 months ago. He was 9 years old. A railroad tie fell on his leg, crushing it. You refused to get him medical treatment. He died of infection 3 days later. Do you deny this?" "I don't recall any boy named Samuel. A boy named Daniel was tied to railroad tracks overnight as punishment for attempting to escape. He suffered severe frostbite and died a month later. Do you deny this? These are fabrications, are they? Emmett Cole witnessed both deaths. He can describe them in detail. Is he fabricating? The boy is lying to avoid honest work and to justify his theft." Graves walked closer to Crane, his voice dropping, but somehow carrying even better in the silent courtroom. "Tell this court the truth, Mr. Crane. You don't run a charity, do you? You run a labor camp. You use orphaned children as slave labor because they're free and nobody cares if they die. Isn't that the truth?" Lowell was shouting objections. Whitmore was gaveling. But Crane's carefully constructed facade was cracking. "Those children would be dead without me." His voice rose to a shout. "I give them purpose. I make them useful instead of wasting away on streets, by beating them, by teaching them that life isn't soft, that work builds character, by starving them, by teaching them to earn their keep, by burying them in unmarked graves when they're too broken to work anymore." Crane's eyes were wild now, his face purple with rage. "Some children are weak. That's not my fault. The strong survive. That's how the world works." The courtroom fell absolutely silent. Even Lowell looked shocked at his client's outburst. Graves spoke quietly. "No further questions, Your Honor." Crane seemed to realize what he'd said. His mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. "You may step down, Mr. Crane." Crane walked back to his table on unsteady legs. Lowell leaned over and whispered urgently in his ear, but the damage was done. Whitmore looked at Graves. "Call your next witness, counselor. I call Emmett Cole." The courtroom fell silent as Emmett stood. His legs were shaking, but he walked to the witness stand with his head up. Lucy squeezed Jesse's hand so hard it hurt. The clerk administered the oath. Emmett's voice was quiet but clear as he promised to tell the truth. Graves approached gently, his manner almost grandfatherly. "Emmett, I know this is difficult, but I need you to tell Judge Whitmore what really happened at Mr. Crane's camp. Can you do that?" Emmett nodded, his hands gripping the arms of the chair. "Yes, sir. How did you come to be in Mr. Crane's custody?" "My mother died when I was 5. Fever. It happened fast. 2 days from when she got sick to when she died. I didn't have anyone else. No father, no aunts or uncles, nobody." "What did you do?" "I lived on the streets in San Antonio. Slept in alleys. Ate from trash bins when I could find them. Tried to stay warm. Tried to stay alive." "How long did you live like that?" "Maybe 3 months. Time gets fuzzy when you're always hungry." "Then what happened?" "Mr. Crane found me one day. He said he had a place for kids like me, kids with nowhere to go. He said if I came with him, I'd have food and a bed. He said he'd take care of me." Emmett's voice grew stronger as he continued. "I was 5 and starving. I would have gone with anyone who said they'd feed me. Tell the judge what the camp was really like." It wasn't what he promised. There were maybe 25 kids there, all different ages. The youngest was maybe 6. We all slept in one big tent on the ground. No beds. Just dirt and whatever blankets we could find. "What kind of work did you do?" "Railroad work. Building track through the hills. We'd carry railroad ties that weighed more than we did. Drive spikes with sledgehammers that were too heavy for us to lift properly. Clear brush, dig. Whatever Mr. Crane told us to do. How many hours a day did you work?" "From before the sun came up until after it went down. Sometimes 15, 16 hours. Longer if we didn't finish what Mr. Crane said we had to finish." "Were you paid for this work?" "No, sir. We got food if we worked hard enough." What happened if you didn't work hard enough? Emmett's voice dropped. We didn't eat that day. Or we got beaten. Or we got put in the box. Tell the judge about the box. It's a metal container, like an oven. They'd lock you inside for hours, sometimes a whole day. In summer it got so hot you couldn't breathe. You'd bang on the sides begging to be let out, but nobody would come. Did this happen to you? Yes, sir. 3 times. Why were you put in the box? Once because I couldn't lift a railroad tie fast enough. Once because I asked for water when we weren't supposed to. Once because I cried when another boy got hurt. Graves picked up Doc Bridger's medical report. Emmett, Dr. Bridger examined you when you came to stay with Mr. Mackenzie. He found scars on your back. How did you get those scars? Mr. Crane beat me with a leather strap. How many times did this happen? Emmett's eyes filled with tears. I don't know, more times than I can count, whenever he said I needed discipline. Did he beat the other children too? Yes, sir, all of us, some worse than others. Graves paused, letting the courtroom absorb this. Emmett, Mr. Crane testified that children don't die at his camp. Is that true? No, sir, kids died. Tell us about that. Emmett took a shaky breath. There was a boy named Samuel. He was 9, strong for his age. One day we were moving a railroad tie, and it fell wrong. Landed on Samuel's leg. We all heard the bones break. 3 loud snaps. What happened to Samuel? We carried him back to camp. His leg was bent the wrong way. Bone was sticking through the skin. We begged Mr. Crane to get a doctor. We begged him. Emmett's tears were flowing freely now, but he said doctors cost too much money. He said Samuel just needed to rest, and he'd heal up fine, but his leg got infected, started turning black, started to smell. Samuel screamed for 3 days straight, begging for help, begging someone to make it stop. And then, on the 4th day, he stopped screaming. By the 5th day, he was dead. Mr. Crane made some of the older boys bury him out in the brush. No marker, no name, like he'd never existed. Several women in the gallery were crying now. Even some of the men looked shaken. Were there other deaths? Yes, sir. A boy named Daniel. He was 11. About a year ago he tried to run away, got maybe 2 miles before Mr. Crane's men caught him. What did they do to Daniel? They brought him back to camp and made all of us watch while they tied him to the railroad tracks. Graves held up a hand. To be clear, they laid him across the tracks? In the path of a train? No, sir. They tied him along the tracks, ropes on his wrists and ankles stretched out so he couldn't move. Then they left him there all night. Why would they do that? To teach the rest of us what happened if we tried to run, mister. Crane stood there and said anyone who tried to help Daniel would take his place. What were the conditions that night? Cold. It was November. Maybe colder than now. We could hear Daniel crying, begging, praying for someone to help him, but we were too scared. What happened to Daniel? In the morning, his fingers and toes were black from frostbite. He couldn't talk anymore, could barely walk. He lived another month, but he was never right after that. Couldn't work, could barely feed himself. Then one morning we woke up and he was gone. Where did he go? Emmett looked directly at Crane. Mr. Crane said he ran away again, but we all knew the truth. Daniel was dead and Mr. Crane had buried him with the others. How many children do you think are buried out there? I don't know for sure. More than 5. Maybe 10. Some died before I got there. Some died while I was there. Kids got sick or hurt or just wore out, and Mr. Crane buried them where nobody would find them. The courtroom was completely silent except for Emmett's voice. Why didn't you tell anyone? Why didn't you ask for help? Who would we tell? We were in the middle of nowhere. The only people who came were the ones delivering supplies, and they worked for Mr. Crane. If we tried to talk to them, we got beaten. Emmett, one more question. Do you have any other family? My brother Billy. He's 12. Where is Billy now? Still at Mr. Crane's camp. Why isn't he here with you? Because when I ran away, Billy helped me. He hit one of the guards with a shovel so I could slip away in the dark. I heard Mr. Crane beating him after I was gone. Heard Billy screaming. But I didn't go back. I just kept running. Emmett's voice broke completely. I left my brother there, and I don't even know if he's alive. He was sobbing now, and several people in the gallery were crying with him. "Emmett, why did you let Mr. Mackenzie help you?" "Because I was freezing and starving, and I wanted to live. I'd been running for 3 days, hiding in wagons, eating whatever I could find. I was so tired I could barely stand. Has Mr. Mackenzie treated you well?" Emmett looked at Jesse, and something in his expression made Jesse's chest tight. "Better than anyone in my whole life. He gave me food, real food, not scraps. He gave me clothes that fit and a bed that was warm. He let me sleep without being scared someone would hurt me. He and Lucy made me feel like maybe I was worth something." "Do you want to stay with Mr. Mackenzie?" "Yes, sir, more than anything in the world, even though it might mean Mr. Crane hurts your brother in revenge." Emmett met Jesse's eyes. "Mr. Mackenzie promised we'd get Billy out too. He promised we'd both be safe. And I believe him. He keeps his promises." Graves turned to the judge. "No further questions, Your Honor." Whitmore looked at Lowell. "Your witness, Counselor." Lowell stood and approached Emmett. His earlier confidence was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like desperation. "Mr. Cole, you're 8 years old. How can this court trust what you remember? Children have active imaginations. They exaggerate. I'm not exaggerating. Are you sure? Or are you repeating what Mr. Mackenzie told you to say to help him win this case?" Emmett's eyes flashed with sudden fire. "Nobody told me what to say. I'm telling the truth about what happened to me and the other kids. A convenient truth. One that gets you out of honest work and into a comfortable home with people who feel sorry for you. It's not about comfort. It's about not being beaten. It's about not watching my friends die." His voice rose, all the pain and rage of 3 years pouring out. "It's about not being so hungry you can't think, about not being so scared you can't sleep, about not having to dig graves for kids who should still be alive." The courtroom erupted. Whitmore gabbled for silence. Lowell tried again, but his voice was weaker. "Mr. Cole, when you left Mr. Crane's care, you took food that didn't belong to you. That's theft. Do you deny it? I took 1 piece of bread and a blanket because I was starving and it was winter and I would have died without them. Is that worse than what Mr. Crane did to us?" The question hung in the air. Lowell had no answer. No further questions. Emmett stepped down. Jesse met him at the gate and pulled him into his arms. The boy was shaking violently. "You did perfect, son. Perfect." Over the next hour, Graves called witness after witness. Doc Bridger testified about Emmett's injuries, his voice clinical, but his anger barely controlled. Reverend Cross spoke about Jesse's character and his devotion to Lucy over 7 years of single parenthood. Marshal Hastings described what he'd seen at the camp and presented the photographs as evidence. The photographs passed through the courtroom, each person who saw them looking more horrified than the last. Finally, Graves stood. "Your Honor, I have one more witness. I call Jesse Mackenzie." Jesse stood and walked to the witness stand. He'd testified in court once before, years ago, over a property dispute. This felt entirely different. He swore to tell the truth and sat down, very aware of every eye in the courtroom watching him. Graves approached. "Mr. Mackenzie, why did you take Emmett Cole into your home?" Jesse looked at his daughter, then at Emmett. "Because my daughter asked me if we could keep him. She saw a child suffering and wanted to help, and I realized I'd spent 7 years hiding from life because I was afraid of getting hurt again." "Tell the court what you mean by that." "My wife Catherine died 7 years ago giving birth to Lucy. My younger brother Thomas died when I was 15, and I couldn't save him either. After Catherine died, I swore I'd never let myself care that much about anyone again. It hurt too much to lose people." "What changed?" "Emmett. When I saw him at that market freezing and starving, I saw my brother. I saw every person I'd walked past because it wasn't my problem, and I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't walk away from a child who needed help, even knowing Mr. Crane had legal guardianship papers. Even then. Because there are things more important than papers, Your Honor. That boy's life is more important than a signature on a document. What kind of home have you provided for Emmett? The same home I've provided for Lucy. Food, warmth, safety, love. The things every child deserves. Mr. Mackenzie, what would you do if this court ruled against you today? Jesse met Judge Whitmore's eyes directly. I'd appeal the decision, and if the appeal failed, I'd find another way to keep him safe. Even if it meant breaking the law? Yes, sir, even then. Because I'm his father now. Not on paper, maybe, but in every way that matters. And a father protects his children, no matter what. You understand you're essentially admitting you'd defy a court order? I'm saying I'd do whatever it takes to protect my son. The same thing you'd do for your children, Your Honor. The same thing any good father would do. For just a moment, something flickered across Whitmore's granite face. Then it was gone. Thank you, Mr. Mackenzie. You may step down. Jesse returned to his seat. Lucy grabbed one hand, Emmett the other. Whitmore looked at both lawyers. Do either of you have additional witnesses? No, Your Honor, they said in unison. Then I'm ready to rule. The courtroom held its collective breath. I've been a judge for 20 years, Whitmore began. In that time, I've made thousands of rulings on thousands of cases. Most were straightforward. Clear law applied to clear facts producing clear outcomes. But some cases, the rare ones, test what law really means, what justice really requires. He paused. 3 years ago, Silas Crane came before this court seeking guardianship of orphaned children. He presented himself as a charitable man providing care for the helpless. The paperwork was in order. I had no reason to doubt him. I signed those papers in good faith. But good faith doesn't excuse willful blindness, and it doesn't excuse allowing evil to continue once you know about it. Crane sat forward, his knuckles white on the table. Today I've heard testimony that shocks the conscience. Medical evidence of systematic abuse. Photographic evidence of children laboring under armed guard like prisoners. Eyewitness testimony of children dying from neglect and deliberate cruelty. Mr. Lowell argues that the law is on his side, that the guardianship papers are valid and must be honored. And from a purely technical standpoint, he's correct. Jesse's heart sank. They'd lost. However, Whitmore continued, courts have inherent power to void contracts and legal instruments that were procured through fraud or used for illegal purposes. This power exists precisely for cases like this one. Mr. Crane obtained guardianship under false pretenses. He represented that he would care for these children, provide for their welfare. Instead, he enslaved them. He worked them to the point of collapse. He beat them. He starved them. And when they could work no more, he buried them in unmarked graves. Whitmore's voice grew harder. That is not guardianship. That is not care. That is criminal conduct masquerading as charity. He looked directly at Crane. I hereby void the guardianship papers signed 3 years ago on grounds of fraud, misrepresentation, and use for illegal purposes. Mr. Crane, you no longer have any legal claim to Emmett Cole or any other child in your custody. The courtroom erupted. People cheering. Crane jumping to his feet in rage. You can't do this. Those papers are legal. Whitmore's gavel cracked like thunder. Sit down, Mr. Crane, or I'll hold you in contempt. Lowell grabbed his client's arm and forced him back into his seat. Furthermore, I'm granting Mr. Mackenzie's petition for custody. Effective immediately, Emmett Cole is his legal son, with all rights and protections that entails. Jesse felt tears streaming down his face. Lucy was crying. Emmett had collapsed against him, sobbing. But Whitmore wasn't finished. Marshal Hastings, please stand. The marshal rose. I'm issuing a federal warrant for the arrest of Silas Crane on charges of child endangerment, forced labor, assault, and murder. You are ordered to take him into custody immediately. 2 deputies moved forward and grabbed Crane's arms. He struggled, shouting, This is outrageous. I'll appeal. I'll take this to the Territorial Supreme Court. You do that, Whitmore said coldly. And when you do, they'll see the same evidence I saw today. They'll hear the same testimony. And they'll reach the same conclusion. He turned back to Hastings. Marshal, You're further ordered to raid Mr. Crane's camp immediately. Take into custody all children found there. Those children are to be evaluated medically and placed with suitable families or proper orphanages until permanent arrangements can be made. Yes, Your Honor. One more thing. Whitmore's voice softened slightly. Marshal Hastings will be searching for a boy named Billy Cole, Emmett's brother. When he's found, I'm granting Mr. Mackenzie temporary custody pending a hearing to make it permanent. Emmett's sob echoed through the courtroom. This court is adjourned. The gavel fell for the final time. Chaos erupted, people rushing forward, Dr. Bridger and Reverend Cross embracing Jessie. Lottie O'Brien crying into her handkerchief. Crane being dragged out in handcuffs, still shouting threats. But Jessie was focused only on the children in his arms. Emmett and Lucy, both crying, both holding on. We won, Emmett whispered. We actually won. We won, Jessie confirmed. You're mine now, legal and forever. And Billy, we're bringing him home, today. I'm riding with the marshal to get him. Can I come? Jessie started to say no, then looked at Emmett's face and changed his mind. Yeah, you can come. He's your brother. You should be there when we bring him home. They rode out 2 hours after the trial ended, while Crane was being locked in the town jail. Marshal Hastings led 6 of his deputies. With Jessie and Emmett, they were 8 riders in total. Jessie and Emmett rode together on Jessie's horse, with Lucy staying behind in town with Doc Bridger and Lottie. The ride to the camp took them through the afternoon and into evening. They pushed hard, wanting to hit the camp before word of Crane's arrest could reach his men. Night had fallen when they finally approached the valley. Hastings deployed his men in a circle around the camp, cutting off escape routes. Then they moved in. The camp was settling for the night. Children huddled around fires, guards lounging with bottles of whiskey. Nobody expected a raid. Federal Marshal, Hastings' voice boomed. Everyone on the ground, now. For a moment nobody moved. Then one guard reached for his rifle. Don't, Hastings warned, his pistol aimed. I will shoot you. The guard looked at the ring of armed men surrounding the camp and slowly raised his hands. The other 2 guards followed suit. Where's Crane? Hastings demanded. Got arrested this morning, one guard muttered. We heard he was at some court hearing in Redemption. Anyone else in charge? Just us. Then you're all under arrest for child endangerment and assault. Deputies, secure them. While the deputies handled the guards, Jessie slid off his horse and helped Emmett down. The boy's whole body was trembling. Billy, Emmett's voice cracked. Billy Cole! Children emerged from tents, blinking in the firelight, scared, confused, not understanding what was happening. Billy, your brother's here. Then Jessie saw him, a boy taller than the others, limping badly out of the largest tent. Dark hair, one eye swollen shut from a recent beating, the other eye searching desperately. Emmett! Billy! The brothers ran toward each other and collided in the middle of the camp. Billy's legs gave out and they both went down, holding each other and crying. Jessie stood back, letting them have this moment. Around him, Hastings and his men were gathering the other children, assessing injuries, trying to bring order to chaos. Marshal, one of the deputies called, you need to see this. Jessie followed Hastings to the edge of the brush. What they found made his stomach turn. 6 graves, maybe more, areas of disturbed earth marked only by weeds and rocks. God Almighty, Hastings breathed. We'll need to exhume them, one deputy said quietly, for evidence. And for proper burial, Jessie added. These children deserve better than unmarked graves. They worked through the night, documenting everything. The conditions, the injuries on the children, the graves. By dawn, they had enough evidence to hang Crane twice over. The ride back to Redemption took most of the next day. They had 23 children, many too weak or injured to ride alone. Billy rode with Jessie and Emmett, the 3 of them squeezed together on one horse. Billy barely spoke. The beating he'd taken after helping Emmett escape had done damage beyond the physical. But when Emmett talked, telling him about Jessie and Lucy and the ranch, something would flicker in his good eye, something that might become hope, given time. They reached town as the sun was setting. The whole town turned out to see them, lining the streets as Hastings led his procession to Doc Bridger's office. Lucy came running, with Lottie O'Brien right behind her. "Pa, you're back!" Jessie dismounted and caught her, then helped Billy down. The older boy could barely stand, leaning heavily on Emmett. "Lucy, this is Billy, Emmett's brother, our brother now." Lucy looked up at Billy with her mother's kind eyes. "I'm glad you're home." Billy's face did something complicated, like he wanted to believe her but didn't dare. "Come on," Jessie said gently. "Let's get you to Doc Bridger, get you checked out and fed." Over the next week, life settled into a new rhythm. Billy healed slowly, both body and mind. Doc Bridger treated his injuries and declared he'd recover fully, though he'd always have limited vision in his left eye. The other 22 children were harder to place. Doc Bridger examined each one, documenting injuries that ranged from malnutrition to broken bones that had healed wrong. Some were claimed by distant relatives who'd been searching for years. Others found homes with families throughout the county who'd been moved by the trial. The youngest, a 6-year-old boy who'd stopped speaking entirely, went to live with Reverend Cross and his wife. 5 children, too damaged to trust easily, were sent to a church orphanage in Austin where they could receive proper care. But all were freed from Crane's hell, and all would carry the scars, visible and invisible, for the rest of their lives. Crane himself stood trial 2 months later. The evidence was overwhelming. He was convicted on 17 counts, including murder, forced labor, and child endangerment. He was hanged on a cold February morning, and nobody in 3 counties mourned him. Judge Whitmore expedited Jessie's adoption of Billy, making it official in a brief hearing where the boy stood between his brother and his new father and said yes, he wanted to be Jessie Mackenzie's son. Spring came to the Texas prairie, bringing green grass and wildflowers. The ranch prospered. Jessie hired 2 hands to help with the work because he had 3 children now who needed his time and attention. Lucy blossomed, delighted to have 2 older brothers to boss around and protect. Emmett grew stronger every day, putting on weight and height, his nightmares gradually fading. And Billy, though scarred, slowly learned that not all adults hurt children, that some could be trusted. One evening in late May, Jessie stood on his porch watching the sunset paint the sky gold and red. Behind him in the cabin, he could hear his children, Lucy reading aloud, Emmett and Billy playing checkers, the sounds of a family alive and well. Doc Bridger rode up, as he did most evenings now. The old man had taken to checking on them regularly, though they all knew it was as much for his benefit as theirs. "Evening, Jessie. Doc." Jessie gestured to the chair beside him. Beautiful sunset. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the light fade. "You know what Catherine would say if she could see you now?" Doc finally asked. Jessie smiled. "She'd say I took my sweet time figuring things out. She'd say you did good. 3 children. All of them happy and healthy. That's something to be proud of. I am." Jessie's voice was quiet. "I spent 7 years thinking my life was over, that I'd never feel whole again. But these kids, they fixed something in me I didn't know was broken. That's what family does." The doc stood, groaning, as his joints protested. "I'll be back tomorrow to check Billy's eye again." "Thanks, Doc." After the doctor left, Jessie sat alone a while longer. He thought about that day at the market, about Lucy's simple question that had changed everything. "Can we keep him, Pa?" He'd said yes, and that yes had saved 3 lives, Emmett's, Billy's, and his own. The door opened behind him. Emmett came out, followed by Billy and Lucy. "Pa," Lucy said, "we're going to sleep outside tonight. Look at the stars, can we?" Jessie looked at his 3 children, at their eager faces, and felt his heart swell. "Yeah, we can do that. Let me get some blankets." They spread blankets on the grass and lay on their backs, 4 people looking up at the infinite sky. Lucy pointed out constellations she'd learned from books. Emmett talked about wanting to learn to read better. Billy was quiet, but his hand found Emmett's in the dark. "Pa," Emmett said after a while, "do you think we'll always be together? Like this?" Jesse thought about promises and the future and all the uncertainty life held. "I can't promise forever, son." "Nobody can. But I can promise I'll fight for it. Every single day. That's good enough for me." They lay there until the stars wheeled overhead and the children drifted off one by one. Jesse carried each of them inside and tucked them into their beds, Lucy in her small room, Emmett and Billy in the loft they now shared. Then he stood in the doorway and watched them sleep, these three souls who'd saved him as much as he'd saved them. Forever had started with a question and a choice. And every day, Jesse made that choice again. To love, to fight, to build a family from broken pieces. That was enough. That was everything. The end.